We're beginning Chapter 12, Silent Coup in American Intelligence of Emerging Viruses, AIDS, and Ebola, Nature, Accident, or Intentional. My attention focused on Kissinger for the duration of the New York trip. It was inconceivable how little I knew and how much I learned about the man whose power not only challenged presidents, but the greatest American demagogue, J. Edgar Hoover. Isaacson revealed that Kissinger and Hoover were virtually at war with each other. And though Kissinger may not have known it, he too was a target of the FBI's director's wiretaps. Might anything less be expected from the man who, through blackmail, made his way to the seat of government and stayed there for more than 4 decades? Would Hoover bow to the forces of change Kissinger so easily applied against the State Department and Defense Department counterparts? Not likely. Hoover and Nixon both distrusted Kissinger as much as he did them, but to Kissinger's advantage, Nixon distrusted Hoover more. Besides, Kissinger and the National Security Council director held power over the Justice Department and his supporters that were a lot wealthier than Hoover's gang of union leaders and mafia chiefs. The Kissinger-Hoover-Nixon triangle of power, cunning and decapitation came one of the most... decapitation, my goodness. The Kissinger-Hoover-Nixon triangle of power, cunning and deception became one of the most disturbing secrets in political history. To relieve the strain this unholy trinity bore, something had to give. Ultimately, when the smoke cleared, Kissinger led. Hoover was dead, and Nixon may as well have been. The biggest winners of the Pennsylvania Avenue War were Kissinger's patrons and disciples who seized all opportunities they could from backing a winner, one whose expressed purpose was global economic and political domination in quest of a new world order. Nixon's perspective. When Kissinger became rabid over the press leaks that announced the North Vietnam bombing operation, Nixon and Haldeman believed Kissinger was one of the leakers. "Get Kissinger away from the press," Haldeman quoted Nixon as saying, "He talks too much." Throughout their relationship, Nixon baited Kissinger about his heritage. Isaacson wrote that Nixon seemed to take a fiendish glee in launching into diatribes against Jews and watching as Kissinger shifted feet nervously, afraid to contradict him. Nixon shared many of the prejudices of uprooted California lower middle class from which he had come. Kissinger later said regarding the president's anti-Semitism, during one telephone conversation overheard and recalled by Winston Lord, Nixon baited Kissinger about Jews and blacks. After they hung up, Lord asked, "Why didn't you say something?" Kissinger responded, "I have enough trouble fighting with him on things that really matter. His attitudes towards Jewish and blacks are not my worry." Hoover's untenable position. During the Nixon years, the FBI labored on a project codenamed Intel to supply Nixon and Kissinger with smut on counterintelligence targets. When the dirt was finally received, Kissinger and Haig ridiculed Hoover's work. "The FBI investigative work I saw was of poor quality," John Ehrlichman said later. "Rumor, gossip, and conjecture, often hearsay, 2 or 3 times removed. When FBI work was particularly bad, I sent it back to Hoover, but the rework was seldom an improvement." In the spring of 1970, with Nixon strained by an unprecedented domestic terrorism epidemic, wherein highly organized revolutionaries dedicated themselves to violent destruction of our democratic system, the president proposed a complete reorganization of the United States intelligence services. Years earlier, Hoover had called for more rigorous counterintelligence activities against blacks and the Nation of Islam. In the late 1960s, he had terminated many of the illegal programs and espionage policies that Nixon and Kissinger now felt needed to be expanded. There was much talk among White House and CIA officials that aged Hoover had grown too weak and timid to effectively lead an invigorated anti-communist campaign at home and abroad. CIA Director Richard Helms's request for deployment of additional FBI support and surveillance of targeted groups was rebuffed by an angry Hoover who saw this as a breach of command and a threat to his autonomy. In February 1970, with Kissinger now at the helm of the National Security Council, this rift between the FBI and CIA grew. When the CIA refused to turn over information about a Denver FBI agent who turned CIA informant without Hoover's knowledge or permission, Hoover ended regular liaison with the CIA. Then, when the feud was criticized by administration chiefs, Hoover ended liaison with all other external agencies except the White House. On June 5, 1970, a concerned President Nixon ordered the directors of America's intelligence community to the White House. Hoover, Richard Helms of the CIA, General Donald V. Bennett of the Defense Department, and Admiral Noel Gaylor and the National Security Agency, and gave them a dressing down. He told them they were disorganized, inefficient, and unproductive. He wanted them to reorganize themselves into a single, streamlined unit that could keep him informed. Hoover was to be chairman. The staff was to be directed by the White House's Tom Charles Houston, who had been in charge of the administration's campaign to mobilize the Internal Revenue Services against its enemies. Houston had also the responsibility of collecting information about foreign involvement in campus disturbances, and in the course of this work had formed an alliance with the FBI's assistant director in charge of domestic intelligence, William C. Sullivan. According to author Richard Powers, in the months that followed, Houston attempted to usurp Hoover's power and position as Domestic Intelligence Agency chief, and White House officials attempted to gain Hoover's resignation. Both efforts failed as the director applied the same tactics he had successfully used for almost half a century: blackmail. About this time, Haldeman, who had evaluated information on U.S. politicians supplied by Hoover, became uneasy. He believed the FBI director was lobbying for Nixon's affection and trying to pique the president's curiosity rather than providing quality intelligence. He also became concerned about Hoover's potential for eavesdropping on the Oval Office. Rosemary Woods, Nixon's secretary, who was later made famous by her accidental erasure of a Watergate tape, was in Haldeman's eyes too friendly with Hoover. He insisted the president minimize the connection he had with Miss Woods. This, according to political investigator and author Anthony Summers, became a turning point in Nixon's relationship with Hoover. FBI Director Hoover, Newsweek reported on May 1969, no longer enjoys direct access to the White House, realizing Nixon's advisors, including Kissinger, were responsible for the change. Edgar struck back in characteristic fashion. That month, using Rosemary Woods to ensure the message got through, he passed an astonishing allegation that Haldeman, Ehrlichman, and a third aide, Dwight Chapin, were homosexual lovers. Haldeman said Hoover's report allegedly came from a bartender who was a source for the FBI on stuff like this. We were supposed to have attended homosexual parties at the Watergate complex. There were dates, places, everything. Well, Every factual allegation he made was totally false and easily disproven. John Mitchell advised the accused staff to give depositions to the FBI to help in their defense, should the need arise. They did what he suggested. Mitchell's conclusion continued. Haldeman was that Mitchell's conclusion, continued Haldeman, was that this was an attempt by Hoover to lay a thread across our path, to keep us in line, remind us of his potential. This was just the start of the game, Summers chronicled. In midsummer, after more bizarre statements by Edgar and Robert Kennedy and Dr. King, former Attorney General Ramsey Clark, an editorial in Washington Post called for his resignation. The president, it was reported, was looking for a way to dump him. Nixon, of course, denied the rumors, Ehrlichman recalled. Sullivan switch. While contemplating ways to diplomatically remove Hoover from office, the president and Kissinger were also needed to fend off the growing threat of domestic violence over Vietnam. As a result, they challenged Hoover to set up his anti-black dissident campaign. Then, something strange happened in June 1971. Sullivan also began quarreling with Hoover and other FBI executives over a decision to increase the legal attaches. FBI agents attached to American embassies abroad. After initially supporting the proposal, Sullivan suddenly reversed himself with a scathing attack on lack of objectivity, originality, and independent thinking among Hoover's executives, Powers wrote. He charged that because of racial conflict, students and academic revolution, and possible increase in unemployment, this country is heading into ever more troubled waters, and the Bureau had better be fully prepared. This cannot be done if we spread ourselves too thin. Puzzled by Sullivan's attack on a policy he had supported a few days before, Hoover had one of his aides analyze Sullivan's memos. The conclusion was that he is more on the side of CIA, State Department, and military intelligence agencies than the FBI. Hoover's assessment was accurate. Sullivan had turned coat. According to Summers, he became frustrated by Edgar's stonewalling over domestic intelligence and by the ending of COINTEL program. National Security Advisor Kissinger desired to expand. He was also allegedly angry about Edgar's latest empire building abroad. Having lost patience with Hoover, Sullivan established covert contacts with Nixon officials, particularly Assistant Attorney General Meriden. Sullivan supplied Meriden with stacks of Hoover's internal correspondence. Meriden passed several of the most select to Attorney General Mitchell, then filed the remainder away in a folder he simply marked Jones. The administration knew that Hoover would undoubtedly find out about the theft. Then, at the height of the furor, is it fervor? I'm going to say fervor. Then at the height of the fervor over the Pentagon Papers, the 47-volume Department of Defense report leaked to the New York Times by Rand Corporation's Vietnam expert Daniel Ellsberg that traced America's involvement in Vietnam, a study in which Kissinger participated. Sullivan told Meriden that Hoover was not of sound mind and that Hoover possessed documents that were out of channel, wiretap information. Hoover, he said, was likely to use these documents to blackmail Nixon, and as long as he held those records, Nixon could not relieve him. The wiretap files to which he was obviously referring to were those ordered by Kissinger, directed by Haig, administered by Hoover and the FBI, authorized by Mitchell, and signed off by the president. The Bureau's copies, taps on at least 4 newsmen and 13 government employees, were then locked away in Sullivan's office. Though Summers failed to mention Kissinger's apparent involvement, he noted that Meriden passed word of the blackmail threat to the president. The orders were sent to Haig most likely by Kissinger to request the FBI, Sullivan, to destroy all such special coverage. In response, Sullivan turned over 2 satchels containing the tap summaries to Meriden. He locked them up in his vault, then waited for further instructions. At the FBI, Sullivan and Hoover finally butted heads on August 28th. After discussing his concerns with numerous FBI colleagues, Sullivan addressed a letter to Hoover defining their differences. "I would like to convince you," he wrote, "that those of us who disagree with you are trying to help you and not hurt you. This letter will probably anger you. In view of your absolute power, you can fire me, or in some other way work out your displeasure with me. So be it." Hoover began the ensuing meeting with Sullivan, Summers revealed, with a harangue. He said he had given the matter a good deal of prayer. Then he began to sputter and stammer. When Sullivan advised him to retire, as Nixon through Meriden undoubtedly advised Sullivan to do, he said he would not. On the contrary, it was Sullivan who was forced to leave. Pretending that he was unaware that Sullivan had passed the incriminating wiretap transcripts over to Meriden, Hoover ordered his aides to search for them in Sullivan's office. The aides pulled every drawer and file but found nothing. When Sullivan returned, Hoover ordered him to reveal their whereabouts. He refused. "If you want to know more," he abruptly said, "you'll have to talk to the Attorney General." Months later, following Hoover's death and the total significance of the wiretap program emerged, Mark Felt, Sullivan's replacement, wondered, It is very strange that Hoover did not explain the entire situation to me, despite ordering Felt to search fruitlessly for the missing wiretap records. Hoover knew the whole story." Ending in an intelligence career. On October 3, 1971, Assistant Attorney General Meriden asked Ehrlichman for advice. Having custody of the dangerous wiretap transcript made Meriden nervous. Meriden was very afraid, Ehrlichman recalled, not only of the integrity of the files, but also of his own personal safety. He felt he was being surveyed by Hoover, that it was not only a matter of time before Hoover called agents of the FBI to break into his office vault and recover the records. Days later, in the Oval Office, Ehrlichman and Attorney General Mitchell requested the president's advice. Not until 1991, with the release of the Nixon tapes, was their conversation disclosed. Mitchell: "Hoover is tearing the place up over there trying to get them. The question is, should we get them out of Meriden's office before Hoover blows the safe and brings them over here?" Ehrlichman: "My impression from talking with Meriden is that Hoover feels very insecure without having his own copy of those things. Because, of course, that gives him leverage with Mitchell and you." Nixon: "Yeah." Ehrlichman: "Because they're illegal. Now he doesn't have any copies and he has agents all over town interrogating people, trying to find out where they are. He got Meriden's building under surveillance." Nixon: "Now why the hell didn't you have a copy too?" Ehrlichman: "If he does, he'll beat you over the head with it." Nixon: "Oh, you've got to get them out of there." Mitchell: "Hoover won't come and talk to me about it. He's just got his Gestapo all over the place." Nixon: "Yeah, just say to Meriden that we want to see them, put them in a special safe." The troop complied with the general's demands. For nearly a year, Nixon and his aides discussed how they might neutralize the Hoover risk to remove him from office. Initially, discharging him had seemed too risky given his popularity, but later polls showed that the public's enthusiasm for the aging FBI chief had waned. This was reinforced by a constant barrage of criticism Hoover received from the press. Much of this was likely contrived by the CIA under Kissinger and Haig National Security Staff chain of command. In response, the director had charged the media with being journalistic prostitutes and ordered FBI personnel to avoid all contact with the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, CBS, and NBC organizations that Hoover knew maintained strong ties to the CIA. "I'm willing to fight him," said the president lamely during a meeting on October 8, 1971 in the Oval Office. "We've got to avoid the situation where he could leave with a blast. If he does go, he's got to go of his own volition." The president had struck out in his previous efforts to dismiss Hoover. Now he was undoubtedly shy and trying again. 2 weeks later, the president received a special report on Hoover from Ehrlichman. Further delay, it cautioned, might be disastrous. Blackmail was suggested. Morale of FBI agents in the field had deteriorated badly. All clandestine activities had been terminated. Liaison with intelligence communities had been disputed and key men forced out. Hoover had reportedly threatened the president. Years of intense adulation have inured Hoover to self-doubt. He remains realistic, however. On June 30th, most of his men, trusted confidant Clyde Tolson, stated a reliable source, "Hoover knows that no matter who wins in 72, he's through." And we'll pick up on this when I get back from a doctor's appointment.